On the warm evening of September 14, 2009, the coastal city of Clearwater Bay, Florida, was alive with its usual rhythm. Tourists strolled along the waterfront, neon signs glowed across the marina, and the sound of music spilled from beachside bars. For the Carter family, however, that night would mark the beginning of a story that would stretch into years of unanswered questions, sleepless nights, and a relentless pursuit of justice. As we open this case file together, remember to like and subscribe to the Cold Case Archive, so stories like this are never forgotten. At just 19 years old, Emily Carter had her whole life in front of her. Bright, responsible, and with dreams of becoming a nurse, she balanced college classes with her evening shifts at the Sunset Grill, a popular cafe near the water. On that September night, she clocked out around 10:15 p.m., waving goodbye to coworkers, her silver Toyota Corolla parked just across the street. It was an ordinary end to a long shift, but Emily Carter would never make it home. When midnight passed with no word, her mother, Linda Carter, began to worry. Emily was always punctual, always quick to call. By 2 a.m., Linda was pacing the living room, her hands trembling as she dialed Emily's number over and over. Her father, David Carter, tried to steady her fears, but unease was already clawing at his chest. By dawn, with Emily still missing, panic consumed the Carter household. Linda called the Bay County Sheriff's Office, her voice breaking as she reported her daughter missing. Deputies responded swiftly, canvassing the area around Sunset Grill. Emily's Corolla was nowhere to be found, nor was there any sign of her. To the Carters, it was as if Emily and her car had vanished into thin air. In the days that followed, the Carter family descended into a haze of desperation. David Carter, a hard-working auto mechanic, tried to maintain composure for his wife and younger son, Ryan, just 15 at the time. But friends remember him breaking down in the shop bathroom, silently crying where no one could see. Ryan, once lively and talkative, became a quiet shadow, avoiding conversations about his sister. Family dinners fell into silence, broken only by the scrape of silverware. Linda, refusing to accept that her daughter was simply gone, lit the porch light every night. It became her ritual, a beacon to guide Emily home. Clearwater Bay, known for its lively boardwalk and sunny beaches, carried a new tension. Posters with Emily's face appeared on shop windows, power poles, and church doors. Vigils were held, neighbors volunteered in search efforts, and strangers prayed for a girl many never knew. Yet, despite the community's determination, no trace emerged. 3 months passed. Still no sign of Emily. The sheriff's office, under growing pressure, released limited details they had quietly collected. The first was blurry surveillance footage from an ATM camera near Sunset Grill. The timestamp read 10:20 p.m., the exact time Emily would have been leaving work. The footage showed headlights passing briefly, the outline of a vehicle disappearing into the night. Investigators believed it was a dark green pickup truck, matching earlier claims from a witness who reported seeing such a vehicle near the cafe that evening. But the image was grainy, too indistinct to read a plate number or identify the driver. The footage was promising, but in 2009, it wasn't enough. The second clue came when a woman's jacket was found near the banks of Willow Creek, less than 200 yards from where Emily's purse had been discovered in the first frantic week of searching. The jacket was waterlogged, caked in mud, and appeared to have been discarded or dragged. It could have been the breakthrough investigators needed. But in 2009, advanced DNA testing was costly and limited. With no direct link to Emily, the jacket was photographed, logged, and shelved in storage. Officers dismissed it as likely unrelated. That choice, to overlook the jacket, would later become the most devastating oversight in the entire investigation. Little did anyone know that forgotten piece of fabric would one day hold the truth. When word of the jacket and the ATM footage leaked, the community erupted. Some accused the Bay County Sheriff's Office of incompetence. What if that jacket was Emily's? What if the killer's DNA was there all along? Angry residents demanded. Others defended the department, arguing that with the technology and budget available in 2009, the officers did what they could. But beneath the arguments, one truth remained. Neither the jacket nor the ATM footage moved the case forward. Linda Carter, however, could not let it go. A neighbor who worked at the sheriff's office had quietly told her about the jacket. From that moment, she obsessed over it. She sat for hours imagining her daughter dragged through the mud by Willow Creek, the jacket left behind as silent evidence of a struggle. She begged detectives to test it. Each time she was met with vague explanations: the cost, the backlog, the uncertainty. To Linda, the jacket was her proof that Emily had been harmed. To investigators, it was nothing more than an item in a locker. The difference in perspective became a chasm of distrust. Meanwhile, whispers spread across Clearwater Bay. A mechanic claimed he once repaired a dark green pickup for a stranger who paid in cash and vanished. A waitress remembered seeing such a truck parked near the beach days before Emily disappeared. Others swore they saw it circling Sunset Grill in the weeks leading up to that night. But like puzzle pieces with no clear fit, these details remained frustratingly incomplete. 3 months in, the case was already cooling. Emily's Corolla had never been found. Witness memories blurred with time. Leads ran dry. And always, looming in the background, the unanswered question: who drove the pickup truck? For Linda Carter, the silence was unbearable. She visited the sheriff's office weekly, demanding updates, demanding action. Each time she left more disheartened. The years dragged on. By 2012, the Bay County Sheriff's Office made the painful announcement: Emily Carter's disappearance was officially classified as a cold case. On paper, her file was reduced to a number among countless others. For Linda, the designation was a gut punch. It meant her daughter's case was no longer a priority. It meant detectives who once vowed to keep searching were now reassigned to other crimes. But Linda refused to let Emily's memory fade. Every September 14th, the Carters held a memorial on Clearwater Bay shoreline, the same beach where Emily once loved jogging at dawn. Neighbors, classmates, and strangers gathered with candles and flowers, letting carnations drift into the waves. At each memorial, Linda read passages from Emily's diary. Her voice shook as she shared her daughter's dream of becoming a nurse, of helping patients at the local hospital. Those words, spoken into the night air, made it feel as though Emily was still present, her smile flickering in the candlelight. But as years passed, attendance dwindled. The media moved on to hurricanes, elections, and newer crimes. Emily's photo disappeared from front pages. Linda felt as if she were screaming into an empty room. Inside the Carter home, Emily's presence lingered. Linda filled the walls with photographs. David kept the family's other Corolla, refusing to sell it as though it were an anchor to his daughter. And Ryan, once silent, began to write journal entries, childish poems, letters to his sister he knew she'd never read. These small rituals kept Emily alive, at least within the walls of their home. By the late 2010s, Clearwater Bay had transformed. New resorts lined the waterfront, high-rise hotels towered over streets, and motorcycle festivals drew tens of thousands of tourists each year. The city was thriving, modernizing, expanding. But amid that progress, Emily Carter's case sat buried in cold storage at the Bay County Sheriff's Office. A photo of a smiling teenager, tucked into a box among hundreds of other unresolved tragedies. For the Carters, the changes in their city only deepened their pain. They felt left behind, as though the world had moved forward, but their family was frozen in 2009. David Carter, the family's rock, bore his pain silently. He worked steadily at the auto shop, but friends noticed the toll. He seemed to age rapidly, his shoulders heavier, his eyes distant. Driving past Sunset Grill, he would grip the steering wheel tightly, staring straight ahead, fighting the memories. By 2016, the strain on his heart proved too much. David Carter died suddenly of a heart attack. At his funeral, friends whispered what many already believed. He had died carrying the weight of his daughter's unsolved case. For Linda, it was another cruel loss. Her husband gone, her daughter missing, her son carrying scars of silence. She was left as the last keeper of Emily's memory. And yet, through it all, she never turned off the porch light. For Linda Carter, that light was more than a beacon. It was a promise. 4 years after Emily Carter's disappearance in 2009, Clearwater Bay seemed to return to its daily rhythm. Tourists strolled the sandy beaches, neon lights flickered across the boardwalk, and the salty breeze carried the sounds of laughter and music from the coastal bars. But in the Carter household, time never moved forward. The silence surrounding Emily's case deepened with every season that passed. At first, the search had been frantic. Volunteers combed the shoreline, helicopters circled over Willow Creek, and news crews camped outside the Bay County Sheriff's Office to broadcast every press conference. But as days became weeks and weeks turned into months, the bright lights of urgency dimmed. The unanswered questions were too heavy for some to carry, and slowly the crowds of helpers dwindled. By the time the first anniversary came, only a small circle of loyal neighbors joined Linda Carter on the beach to release flowers into the tide. She held Emily's photograph against her chest, whispering her daughter's name as carnations drifted into the dark waves. That tradition became her lifeline. David Carter, Emily's father, carried the loss differently. Once a strong and steady man, he grew thinner, quieter, as though every breath demanded more effort than the last. He rarely spoke about Emily, but his grief was visible in the way he lingered on the porch long after midnight, staring at the street where her car should have pulled in that September night. His silence was heavier than words, and it seeped into the walls of their home. Ryan Carter, only a teenager at the time of his sister's disappearance, carried his own silent burden. He blamed himself for not picking her up after her late shift at Sunset Grill, even though Emily had insisted she'd be fine. Ryan's classmates whispered about the case in hallways, some with pity, others with morbid curiosity. He withdrew, burying his pain in books and late-night runs, trying to outrun the shadow of his sister's absence. As the years dragged on, rumors filled the vacuum left by unanswered questions. Some whispered that Emily might have run away with a secret boyfriend. Others suggested debts or involvement in something dangerous. Linda Carter fought these rumors fiercely, reminding anyone who would listen that Emily was responsible, loving, and full of dreams. But whispers, once spread, are impossible to fully silence. The emotional toll fractured the Carter family. In 2016, David's health gave way under the strain. He collapsed suddenly from a heart attack, leaving Linda a widow. At his funeral, neighbors recalled how David had once led prayer vigils for Emily, always holding on to the hope of her return. Many quietly said he died of a broken heart, burdened by questions that never found answers. Ryan, now a young adult, left Clearwater Bay for college in Riverside. He avoided speaking about his sister, but in the quiet of his dorm, he sometimes opened old photo folders. One image of him and Emily playing on the beach would flash on the screen before he shut the laptop abruptly, as if staring too long would drown him in grief. Through all those years, Linda Carter refused to change Emily's room. The bed remained neatly made, the quilt folded as if awaiting her return. The faint scent of her perfume lingered in the sheets, a cruel reminder of a life paused in 2009. On the bulletin board hung Emily's unfinished class schedule, alongside snapshots of her smiling with friends, each one a reminder of plans that never came true. Every evening, Linda performed her ritual. She turned on the porch light at dusk, its yellow glow stretching across the street like a beacon. At first, it was lit for Emily, a signal to guide her home. Over time, it became a symbol of grief, of hope, of defiance against forgetting. Neighbors came to recognize that light. For some, it was a reminder of the unresolved mystery. For others, it was haunting, an emblem of a pain too deep to ease. Years of silence passed. New deputies rotated through the Bay County Sheriff's Office, some barely aware of Emily's case except as a name on a list of cold files. The jacket found near Willow Creek remained sealed in evidence storage, dismissed long ago as non-priority. The green pickup truck sighting faded into rumor, and the Corolla, swallowed by the St. Andrews River, was still hidden beneath layers of mud and secrecy. In 2023, everything changed. That year, Florida launched a statewide program allocating special funding to cold case units. Families of the missing had lobbied for years, demanding that advances in forensic science be used to revisit cases once considered unsolvable. Their efforts finally bore fruit, and Bay County Sheriff's Office received resources to re-examine dormant files. When Linda Carter received the phone call that her daughter's case was among those chosen for review, she trembled so hard she had to sit down. For 14 years, she had begged detectives to test the jacket found near Willow Creek. Back then, costs and outdated methods had shelved it as irrelevant. Now, for the first time, hope stirred. Linda attended the announcement at the sheriff's office. Reporters snapped photos as she sat quietly in the front row, clutching Emily's picture frame. She didn't speak, but her presence alone told the story of years endured without answers. The evidence locker was opened, and investigators retrieved the mud-stained jacket. Its fabric was brittle, its colors faded, still carrying the smell of damp earth. Forensic experts in sterile lab coats carefully unsealed the bag. With advanced DNA sequencing, They examined fibers overlooked in 2009. What they found silenced the room. Alongside traces of Emily's DNA, a strong male profile emerged. It was clear, undeniable, and ready for comparison. When uploaded to the federal CODIS database, the result came back with a match: Mark Reeves. The name sent shockwaves through the investigative team. Reeves had lived only blocks from Sunset Grill in 2009. His record included arrests for assault and disorderly conduct, a history of domestic violence, and probation for a violent bar fight. Yet he had slipped through the cracks after moving out of Clearwater Bay in 2010. To detectives, this was like prying open a door that had been rusted shut for over a decade. Suddenly, the vague green pickup truck sighting and the untested jacket formed a new narrative. Reeves wasn't just a name. They now had physical evidence tying him to Emily Carter's disappearance. When Linda was told the news, her knees nearly gave way. She remembered her pleas in 2009, 2010, 2011, each time begging detectives to test the jacket. If they had listened then, perhaps her husband David wouldn't have died carrying the weight of unanswered questions. Relief and fury mingled within her. The Bay County Sheriff's Office called a press conference to confirm the discovery. Reporters crowded in, microphones thrust forward. "We have a DNA match," the lead investigator announced. Mark Reeves is now the prime suspect in Emily Carter's case. That night, Clearwater Bay erupted in conversation. Residents remembered Reeves, the electrician who fixed lights at Sunset Grill, the man seen at church events, the quiet neighbor who waved but never lingered. That he could be connected to the town's darkest mystery left people stunned and betrayed. The media spotlight reignited old memories. Sarah Mitchell, a former bartender working near Sunset Grill, came forward. She recalled seeing Reeves sitting in his dark green pickup truck the very night Emily vanished, the engine idling, his eyes fixed on the diner. At the time, she dismissed it as coincidence. Now she was certain it was no accident. Another neighbor, Tom Walker, remembered seeing Reeves's truck covered with a tarp late at night, tools shifted around in the bed as if hiding something. He hadn't mentioned it in 2009, believing it unimportant. Now he spoke with regret. "We let too many details slip away." Piece by piece, fragments from the past began forming a new picture. Reeves had the truck. He was near Sunset Grill that night. His DNA was on Emily's jacket. And he had a history of violence. These weren't coincidences anymore, they were connections. For Linda Carter, the news was overwhelming. She sat on her porch swing, the lights still glowing, hands shaking as she held the newspaper bearing Reeves's mugshot. Her mind reeled back to those nights after Emily vanished. Nights when Reeves himself had joined search groups, patting David on the shoulder, offering words of comfort. Now she understood those gestures not as kindness, but as concealment. A predator hiding among neighbors, smiling as he buried the truth. The town of Clearwater Bay was shaken awake. Conversations in diners, churches, and barbershops revolved around Reeves's name. At Sunset Grill, Emily's last workplace, the owner pinned a large photo of Reeves with a bold notice: "If you saw him here, contact police." Regulars stopped to stare, whispering that they remembered him, though they never suspected his involvement. Clearwater Bay was no longer just a coastal tourist town. It became a stage for the reawakening of a haunting case, one that had finally begun to yield answers after 14 long years. And for the first time since 2009, Linda Carter felt a shift. The porch light she had kept burning wasn't just a beacon of hope anymore. It was a sign that justice, long delayed, was finally drawing near. For years, the disappearance of Emily Carter hovered over Clearwater Bay like a dark cloud that refused to drift away. Even as time moved on, the unanswered questions lingered in the air, heavy and suffocating. The breakthrough in 2023 that identified Mark Reeves through DNA evidence had ignited new hope, but the case still lacked something crucial: Emily herself. Without her, there was no closure, only theories, pain, and speculation. The Bay County Sheriff's Office knew they had to go further. Witnesses like Sarah Mitchell and Tom Walker had resurfaced with disturbing memories, but the real turning point came when investigators decided to return to the one place that had always whispered suspicion: the St. Andrews River. The river cut across the city like a vein, its waters carrying both beauty and mystery. Tourists admired it from boardwalk cafes, neon signs reflected across its rippling surface, and boats drifted lazily along currents that once defined Clearwater Bay's charm. Yet beneath those same waters, investigators believed secrets might be sleeping, secrets left undisturbed since the night Emily vanished. Back in 2009, police had used sonar boats to search for her silver Toyota Corolla, but the technology then was crude, incapable of penetrating the dense layers of silt and mud at the bottom. For 14 long years, the river kept its silence. But in 2023, armed with state-of-the-art 3D sonar scanners and professional dive teams, detectives returned determined to uncover what the old current had hidden. It was a gray March morning when the search began. A thin mist hovered over the St. Andrews River, blurring the outlines of the waterfront homes that had sprung up in the years since Emily disappeared. The water was eerily still, as if aware of the intrusion, reflecting the muted sky above. Boats lined with scanning equipment swept back and forth methodically, their sonar screens glowing with ghostly shapes. Divers in black wetsuits waited on the decks, helmets on, tanks ready, watching as the technicians marked every anomaly. Hours passed with only sunken logs and twisted scrap metal flashing across the screens, until one reading stopped the team cold. There it was. The image was distorted by mud and time, but unmistakable. A long, boxy frame with 4 round impressions. The outline of a car. Excitement buzzed through the boat. Coordinates were logged and the divers prepared to enter. As they slipped into the icy water, their flashlights cut through the murky depths. Slowly, the shape materialized before them, cloaked in silt and algae. A small sedan, its silver paint corroded, but intact enough to recognize. Emily Carter's missing Corolla. After 14 years, the car had been found. Word spread quickly. Reporters and curious residents gathered along the riverbank, straining to see as cranes and machinery moved into position. The water churned violently as the car was lifted from its muddy grave. The crowd gasped as the rusted vehicle broke the surface, water gushing from shattered windows, weeds dangling like grotesque decorations. The St. Andrews River roared with machinery, voices, and the pounding of hearts. Police quickly cordoned off the scene, but the truth could not be hidden. Everyone knew, this was the discovery that would finally break the case wide open. Forensic experts approached the Corolla carefully, gloves on, their faces pale as they peered inside. What they saw silenced the riverbank. Bones. Scattered human remains lay across the back seat, fragile yet structured enough to identify. Nylon rope, frayed and waterlogged, was still wrapped around what had once been an arm. Mud and algae covered every surface, but the message was undeniable. Emily Carter had been restrained before the car was sunk. Personal items were retrieved as well. A bracelet Linda Carter had given her daughter on her 18th birthday, rusted but intact. A waterlogged notebook with smeared pages. And a broken cell phone, nothing more than plastic and corroded circuits now. The remains were sent immediately for DNA testing, though investigators already knew in their hearts whose bones they had found. Within weeks, confirmation arrived. The remains were Emily Carter's. When Linda Carter received the call, she was sitting in Emily's bedroom, preserved exactly as it had been in 2009. Posters still clung to the walls. Her bed was neatly made. The faint scent of her perfume lingered. As the officer's voice trembled on the other end of the line, Linda collapsed onto her daughter's desk, clutching Emily's framed photo. That night, as always, the porch light glowed, no longer a beacon to guide Emily home, but a vigil to honor her spirit. Through tears, she whispered, "You're home now." The news shook Clearwater Bay. For 14 years, residents had debated whether Emily was alive or dead, whether she had been kidnapped or had run away. Now the truth was undeniable. She was gone, murdered, and her car had been hiding in plain sight, beneath the very river that flowed through the heart of the community. The story dominated headlines across Florida. Television stations replayed footage of the Corolla being hoisted from the water. Newspapers printed front-page photos of the rusted vehicle, describing it as a coffin in plain sight. People were heartbroken, but they were also enraged. How had the most crucial piece of evidence remained undiscovered for over a decade? At the Bay County Sheriff's Office, the atmosphere shifted immediately. This was no longer a missing person case. It was officially a homicide. The nylon rope, the DNA on the jacket found near Willow Creek, and now the recovery of Emily's car and remains formed a chain of evidence that was impossible to ignore. Mark Reeves, once just a suspicious name buried in old files, was now staring down the weight of undeniable proof. The community responded with both grief and fury. Vigils were held along the riverbank, dozens of people gathering with candles and flowers. Someone placed a handwritten note at the site, "Emily, we finally brought you out of the dark." At the Sunset Grill, her former workplace, a framed picture of Emily was placed by the register, surrounded by flowers left by customers who had never forgotten her bright smile. For Linda Carter, the discovery was bittersweet. She had prayed for answers, but answers came with agony. She left the porch light on, not waiting for Emily to walk through the door, but as a permanent tribute. In Clearwater Bay, innocence was lost. The truth had emerged, and with it, a chilling realization. Emily's killer had walked among them all along. The investigation pressed forward with renewed urgency. Reeves' DNA on the jacket, his ownership of a green pickup truck matching Sarah Mitchell and Tom Walker's statements, and now the damning phone data showing his device near Sunset Grill the night Emily vanished. Together, these painted a grim and irrefutable picture. Veteran officers who had worked the case in 2009 sat in silence, haunted by regrets. If the jacket had been tested sooner, if the river had been searched with better technology, maybe David Carter would still be alive, not buried by the weight of grief. But the past could not be changed. What mattered now was justice. Inside the cold case unit's office, the evidence was laid out on a long conference table. Photos of the muddy jacket, the nylon rope, Reeves' criminal record, and maps of Clearwater Bay marked with phone pings and witness statements. Each thread pointed to one conclusion. Emily Carter had not vanished into thin air. She had been kidnapped, restrained, and murdered. And Mark Reeves was the man who had done it. The net was tightening. The long shadow that had hung over Clearwater Bay for 14 years was finally beginning to lift. Justice, long delayed, was now closer than ever. For years, Clearwater Bay carried the weight of Emily Carter's disappearance like a scar it couldn't hide. Residents grew accustomed to walking past missing person posters that had long since faded, their corners curled from the salty air. The town carried on. Boats still drifted across the marina, families still strolled the beaches. But for those who knew Emily, life never truly moved forward. There was always the gnawing sense that something had been left unfinished, that somewhere in the quiet of their community lurked an unspoken truth. Emily's case was buried in the cold case archives of the Bay County Sheriff's Office, another file in a long cabinet of tragedies. 14 years had passed, and hope had dimmed to a flicker. Yet behind the scenes, a small group of detectives refused to let her story fade. What they uncovered would not only breathe life into a case long considered unsolvable, but it would also expose a betrayal so profound that Clearwater Bay would never view itself the same way again. The discovery wasn't cinematic, no sudden eureka moment, no dramatic chase. Instead, it was the result of persistence. Late in 2022, as part of Florida's new cold case initiative, technicians revisited evidence once deemed inconsequential. Among the dusty boxes pulled from storage was a clear plastic bag containing Emily's mud-stained jacket, recovered near Willow Creek just days after she vanished. For years, that jacket had sat untouched. Back in 2009, forensic testing was costly, and with no visible signs of blood or damage, investigators deprioritized it. Many had believed it was simply a discarded piece of clothing, unrelated to the case. But technology has changed. Even the faintest biological trace could now tell a story. A lab technician swabbed fibers from inside the collar and cuffs. Days later, results came back. The DNA profile belonged to a man whose name was already familiar in Clearwater Bay, Mark Reeves. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Reeves wasn't some anonymous outsider. He was woven into the very fabric of the town. A former volunteer firefighter, an electrician who had repaired wiring at Sunset Grill, a man who had joined search efforts after Emily vanished, even standing shoulder to shoulder with David Carter at prayer vigils. He had shaken Linda Carter's hand. He had comforted her when she broke down in tears. And all along, his DNA was on Emily's jacket. When news of the match reached the Carter family, Linda nearly dropped the phone. 14 years of pleading with authorities to test the jacket. And now, finally, the truth had been confirmed. She sat at her kitchen table clutching Emily's framed photo, her knuckles white. David wasn't alive to hear it. He had died in 2016, his heart giving out under the weight of unanswered questions. Linda whispered through tears, "You were right, David. You were right to keep praying." For the people of Clearwater Bay, the revelation was surreal. Reeves wasn't just a neighbor, He had been trusted. He'd fixed lights, offered free advice about wiring, and lent his tools to friends. Some remembered him standing outside Sunset Grill the night after Emily vanished, helping to staple missing posters on telephone poles. To learn that this same man was now the prime suspect in her murder felt like a betrayal of the deepest kind. "I let him into my home," one woman recalled bitterly. "He rewired my kitchen while we chatted about our kids. And all that time he knew what he'd done." Others couldn't reconcile the friendly, soft-spoken man they'd known with the image now painted by law enforcement. Some whispered that the police must have made a mistake. But the DNA didn't lie. Detectives began reconstructing Reeves's past. The more they uncovered, the clearer the picture became. Reeves had a record, one dotted with arrests for bar fights, disorderly conduct, and domestic disputes. Though never convicted of major crimes, he had a reputation for volatility when drinking. Witness statements resurfaced. Sarah Mitchell, a bartender who worked near Sunset Grill, came forward to say she remembered seeing Reeves sitting in his dark green pickup the night Emily disappeared, his gaze fixed on the cafe. Another neighbor, Tom Walker, remembered the same truck later parked under a tarp, suspiciously hidden. What seemed like fragmented memories in 2009 now aligned with chilling precision. Reeves wasn't just in the wrong place at the wrong time, he was there because he was hunting. And all the while he kept up his act as the concerned neighbor. His ability to mask his guilt, to blend into the search parties and even embrace the grieving Carters, was perhaps the cruelest twist of all. Arresting Reeves required care. Though not a man of great influence, he was deeply embedded in Clearwater Bay. Detectives feared that a sloppy or premature move might jeopardize their case. They combed through his phone records from 2009, cross-referenced cell tower data, and pieced together his movements the night Emily vanished. Everything pointed back to him. Finally, they presented their evidence to the state attorney's office. A warrant was authorized. Reeves would be arrested on suspicion of kidnapping and murder. Detectives coordinated the operation carefully. They studied his daily routines, noting when he left home, when he shopped for groceries, when he visited his sister in a neighboring town. The decision was made to strike in the early morning, before he could leave or contact anyone. On a cold February morning in 2023, just before dawn, unmarked vehicles quietly converged on Reeves's modest mobile home on the outskirts of Clearwater Bay. Neighbors peered from behind curtains, startled by the flashing lights that soon followed. At 6:04 a.m., officers surrounded the property. A loud knock shattered the morning silence. Reeves stumbled to the door in sweatpants, his hair disheveled, confusion clouding his face. When he opened it, the lead detective spoke clearly. "Mark Reeves, you are under arrest for the murder of Emily Carter." Handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. For a moment he said nothing. His expression was blank, almost detached. Then, as he was led past flashing lights and news cameras that had caught wind of the arrest, his jaw tightened. Some described his face as cold, others as resigned. Either way, the mask he'd worn for years had finally slipped. The arrest sent Clearwater Bay into an emotional tailspin. Local television ran continuous coverage, showing Reeves being escorted into custody. Social media erupted with disbelief. At the Sunset Grill, where Emily had last been seen alive, customers gathered in stunned silence. The owner taped Reeves's mugshot beside Emily's smiling photo. "The man who hurt her was here among us," he told reporters, his voice trembling. "And we never saw it." Residents shared their feelings in hushed conversations at diners and churches. For some, the betrayal cut deeply. They had shared meals with Reeves, invited him to barbecues, trusted him with their homes. Others expressed anger, not only at Reeves but at the system that had left Emily's case cold for so long. "If they had tested that jacket back then," one man muttered, "maybe David Carter would still be alive." For Linda Carter, the arrest was both devastating and relieving. She had fought for this moment, yet when it arrived, the emotions were overwhelming. She sat in Emily's preserved bedroom, her quilt neatly folded, her perfume faintly lingering in the air, when the detective called to confirm Reeves was in custody. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "We got him, Emily. We finally got him." Ryan Carter, now grown and living in Riverside, drove back to Clearwater Bay the day of the arrest. Standing beside his mother, he struggled to reconcile the teenage grief he had once buried with the reality now unfolding. "All those years," he said quietly, "and he was right here the whole time." For the Carter family, the arrest wasn't closure. Emily was still gone, but it was justice long denied finally within reach. Clearwater Bay's image as a sleepy, trusting town had been shattered. Reeves wasn't a stranger lurking in shadows. He was one of their own. He had smiled at them, shaken their hands, joined their vigils. And all the while he carried the darkest of secrets. The sense of betrayal reverberated across the community. At town meetings, residents demanded answers about why it had taken so long for evidence to be tested. Parents grew more protective of their children. Neighbors looked at each other differently, wary in ways they hadn't been before. The arrest had solved one mystery, but it had also left the community with haunting new questions. How many other secrets lay buried in the cold case files? How many other killers might be hiding behind familiar faces? If you've been following Emily Carter's case and want to see how justice unfolds, now is the time to subscribe to the Cold Case Archive. These stories remind us that truth can hide for years, but it will always surface. Don't miss what comes next. As Reeves awaited trial, detectives prepared their case with meticulous care. DNA on the jacket, eyewitness testimony about the green pickup truck, phone records placing him near Sunset Grill, all of it pointed toward his guilt. The discovery of Emily's car and remains in the St. Andrews River only strengthened the prosecution's hand. The nylon rope, the personal belongings, the forensic analysis, each piece of evidence formed part of a damning puzzle. Reeves had evaded justice for 14 years, but the walls were now closing in. For Clearwater Bay, this was more than just a criminal case. It was the end of an era of uncertainty. Emily Carter's story, once buried in silence, was finally forcing the truth into the open. And with Reeves behind bars, the town braced itself for the next chapter, the fight for conviction. As the days passed, the community of Clearwater Bay began to process the news of Mark Reeves' arrest. For many, the shock was not just about the crime itself, but the revelation that the man they had known as a friend, a neighbor, and a volunteer firefighter had been living a double life. Behind the mask of normalcy, behind the smile and the comforting words, was a man capable of horrific violence. It was a discovery that sent waves of disbelief through every corner of the town. For the Carter family, however, the arrest was only the beginning of a difficult and emotional journey. Justice, they knew, was never simple. The long-awaited answers had arrived, but they had come at a great cost. Emily's life had been brutally taken, and the man who had once walked beside them in prayer vigils and search efforts was the one who had caused their pain all along. As investigators dug deeper into Reeves' past, a disturbing pattern emerged. For years, he had crafted a facade of reliability, helping neighbors fix their wiring, attending town meetings, offering support to the Carters during their darkest days. But beneath that veneer was a man plagued by volatility and a history of troubling behavior. Old incidents resurfaced. In 2007, Reeves had been involved in a violent altercation at a bar. In 2008, police were called to his home after neighbors reported shouting and broken glass. Both incidents were dismissed at the time as isolated outbursts. But now, in light of what had been uncovered, they painted a chilling portrait of a man capable of boiling rage. Witnesses from the 2009 search efforts recalled how Reeves had been unusually present. He volunteered for nearly every shift, hovering close to Linda Carter, sometimes too close, inserting himself into conversations with detectives as if he belonged at the table. One deputy later admitted, it felt like he was trying too hard. Looking back, it was all an act. The Bay County Sheriff's Office worked methodically to reconstruct Emily's final hours. On September 14, 2009, she finished her late shift at the Sunset Grill. Co-workers remembered her stepping outside to take a phone call around 9 p.m. She returned visibly anxious but said little, only that she had to leave quickly. At the time, no one thought much of it. That phone call, investigators now revealed, had been traced to a prepaid burner phone registered to Mark Reeves. The records showed a string of calls between his personal number and the burner that night. Minutes later, Emily clocked out for the last time. For years, detectives had assumed Emily was abducted on her walk to her car. But the phone data reframed the entire narrative. She had been lured. Reeves had dangled some excuse to draw her to Willow Creek, the very place her jacket was later found. The DNA on that jacket, matched to Reeves, was now joined by phone records, witness recollections, and the discovery of Emily's car in the St. Andrews River. Together, they formed a chain that was impossible to break. Why Emily? Why her? Investigators uncovered troubling details. Reeves had a history of making inappropriate comments toward young women at Sunset Grill. Female employees recalled feeling uncomfortable around him, though most dismissed it as awkwardness at the time. Emily, however, had rejected his advances more than once. Witnesses confirmed Reeves had been seen following her home from work on more than one occasion. He had convinced himself that he could win her over, but when Emily kept her distance, his obsession curdled into rage. Detectives believed that on the night of September 14th, Reeves finally acted on his fixation. What happened at Willow Creek was pieced together from evidence. The nylon rope recovered from Emily's car suggested restraint. The violent state of her remains indicated a struggle. Prosecutors would later argue that Reeves' crime was premeditated, not a tragic mistake, but the calculated act of a predator. By 2024, the case was ready for court. Clearwater Bay, and indeed all of Florida, braced for the spectacle. Journalists flooded the town. The courthouse steps filled with cameras. Inside, every seat was taken. Linda and Ryan Carter sat in the front row each day, clutching tissues, their faces a mixture of grief and resolve. They had waited 14 years for this. The prosecution presented its case with unrelenting precision. DNA evidence linking Reeves to Emily's jacket. Phone records showing the burner phone calls. Eyewitness accounts placing Reeves near Sunset Grill and later acting suspiciously around his truck. Forensic evidence from the submerged Corolla, the nylon rope, the remains, the bracelet Emily always wore. One prosecutor stated in closing arguments, "Mark Reeves hid in plain sight, cloaking himself in the trust of this community. But masks slip. And when his did, the truth revealed a predator who stole a daughter, a sister, a life." The defense tried to argue that Reeves had been unfairly targeted, that the DNA was transferable, and the timeline circumstantial. But their claims buckled under the sheer weight of evidence. When the jury returned after only 6 hours of deliberation, the room fell silent. "We find the defendant guilty of first-degree murder." The courtroom erupted in sobs. Linda Carter clutched Ryan's hand, her tears flowing, not just of grief but of release. After 14 years of torment, the truth had been spoken aloud. Reeves was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He showed little reaction, staring blankly at the floor as the judge read the sentence. For the Carters, it was justice, though no punishment could ever restore what was lost. Outside the courthouse, neighbors gathered in hushed circles. Many shook their heads, still unable to believe that the man who once fixed their lights or shared a beer at Sunset Grill had been living a lie so monstrous. Clearwater Bay would never see him the same way again. Linda Carter returned home that night, switched on the porch light, as she had every evening for 14 years, and whispered into the night air, "We did it, Emily. We brought you justice." Emily Carter's story is one of loss, persistence, and the power of truth to finally break through silence. For Linda, Ryan, and the Clearwater Bay community, justice came late, but it came. And here at the Cold Case Archive, we will continue to keep these stories alive so the forgotten are remembered, and justice delayed is never justice denied. If you found this case as powerful as we did, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Together, we'll ensure that no story, no victim, and no truth is ever left in the dark.